Alright, late in the 18th century and early 19th century, developments in science on the European continent are going to mess Europeans' crap up. They're not going to know which way is up, which way is down, or which way is sideways, so I reckon we ought to talk about it. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked with a healthy dose of irrationality, let's get to it. Now, in the last video, we talked about Charles Darwin and his new theory of evolution and natural selection. And Darwin's work caused no small stir in the religious world, since his work pointed out that humans have evolved over millions of years and were not necessarily the objects of a special creation of God. Now, to add to all the scientific overturning of previously held darlings, these advances in science had other consequences as well, including the rise of positivism. This was the idea that any rational conclusion must be able to be scientifically verified or provable through mathematical quantification. In other words, positivism taught that truth can only be known through science and math. On the flip side, if a truth could not be verified in those ways, then it could not be considered truly true. And look, there's going to be a lot of mind-bending realities to explore in this video, so if you need more help, then you can check out my AP Euro review pack, which has lots more practice on these issues and will help you get an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May. Link in description. Anyway, you can probably already see why this development got a lot of people hot and bothered. In Europe, where the majority of people were Christians of various stripes, their entire religion was based not on scientific calculations, but on divine revelation from God. Positivism says that you discover what is true about the world from the inside. Like, here's a plant, put it under a microscope, here's an electron, math it out. But Christianity teaches that the truest truths of the world come from outside the world, which is to say, from God as revealed in the Bible. So think about it. The central doctrine of Christianity is the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And by his blood, God's people are atoned for and forgiven. And that is an article of belief, not scientific exploration or mathematical inquiry. Like, think about it. Even if a scientist possessed a real drop of Christ's blood and that scientist put that blood on a slide under a microscope, that scientist would not see any atonement or forgiveness in that blood. He would just see blood. Like, that's what it is. Atonement and forgiveness are believed, not scientifically proven. Thus, this emerging philosophical movement of positivism was a threat to revealed religion. And then later in the 19th century, a commitment to this kind of thought had a significant consequence, namely a new relativism in moral values. You see, since positivism obliterated the idea that there was one overarching truth that applied to everyone everywhere, that meant that all truth was relative. What's true for you may not be true for me, because we evaluate that truth from different perspectives, and there's no standard outside of us that can tell us which one of us is right. So under this way of thinking, no truth is objective, but rather relative. It's like that old story of the blind men trying to describe the elephant. Each man felt a different part of the elephant and thus came to different conclusions about what an elephant is like. The blind man holding the elephant's leg said the elephant was like a tree. The man holding the elephant's trunk said an elephant was like a snake, and so on. You see, Christianity would say we can know the true nature of an elephant because God tells us what the elephant is like. But positivism and the relativism it engendered said no one can really know for sure which part of the elephant we're holding, so the truth of the elephant's essence is relative for each person. So hopefully you can feel the tension between these two poles. Like, on the one hand, the advances in science are creating significant strides in knowing the world truly, but on the other, the further science advances, the more uncertain things become. And the overarching name that was given to this growing tension was modernism. So let's first talk about how modernism was expressed in philosophy, and particularly these philosophers are going to emphasize not the rational nature of the world, but the irrational nature of the world. Now, this was known as, not surprisingly, irrationalism, and it challenged the conclusions of the Enlightenment significantly. You see, Enlightenment philosophy focused on syllogistic reasoning, like if A, then B, therefore C, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. But irrationalism broke from this and instead focused on the irrational impulses of human nature. They insisted that human life and decisions could not be explained by rational postulates, but rather had to focus on that more ethereal human instinct called the spirit. And the poster boy for irrationalism was Friedrich Nietzsche. He argued that reason actually plays a very small role in human life and that most people are governed instead by their passions and base instincts. I mean, humans like to think of themselves as rational creatures weighing cause and consequence before making decisions, but Nietzsche came along and was like, y'all so crazy. Though we like to think of ourselves as rational, Nietzsche argued that we are really governed by emotions and passions and instincts. And Nietzsche thought we got into this sorry state mainly because of Christianity. By his reckoning, the great evil of modern humanity was how enslaved they were to the Christian moral ethic that had been handed down to them, which stifled creativity under a mountain of ethical obligations. So Nietzsche claimed that God was in fact dead and that the Europeans of this age had killed him, and that created the possibility of the liberation of humanity. Along these same lines, French philosopher Henri Bergson argued that science is good for attaining practical knowledge of the world. Like, it's useful to know that because of the force of gravity, you can't just jump out of a window and expect not to be hurt. Like, that, all things being equal, is useful knowledge. It's useful to know that germs cause disease, and it's useful to know what kind of chemicals can cure those diseases. For those kinds of questions, Bergson argued science is great. But then he argued that science breaks down when trying to analyze and describe the essence of true reality. Reality, Bergson argued, could only be experienced intuitively, not analyzed scientifically. And so in this way, such philosophies taught societal progress was achieved not mainly by by rational scientific postulates, but through struggle and conflict. Now, this emphasis on irrationalism was also applied to the new field of psychology, thanks to Sigmund Freud, who applied these ideas to the internal world of the human personality. He argued that human behavior was governed and determined not by the rational choice of the individual, but rather by the subconscious of the person, which was shaped by the experiences of childhood. Again, we like to think we make our own rational decisions in our lives, but Freud would say, no, human decisions are largely the product of all those childhood traumas that you have repressed and are struggling to make it back into your conscious awareness. That's what's making your decisions, not your pristine thinky parts. And Freud developed a method for tracing these links from the conscious to the subconscious called psychoanalysis, and though many of his ideas were later proven wrong, his advances laid the groundwork for the field of psychology. And finally, these new developments in the irrational nature of life were applied to the natural sciences. Now remember from Unit 4 that according to Newtonian physics, the physical world was objectively knowable through rational engagement. Oh look, drop an apple and it falls to the floor and we can predict the rate of its falling with an equation. Oh look, planets move in ellipses around the sun and we can model the exact paths of those planets. But then scientists came along in the late 19th century and early 20th century to completely ruin that predictable, tidy, rational way of knowing the world. They said, oh no, just go one click below all of these immutable laws of the universe and you'll see that everything is chaos. One such scientist was physicist Max Planck. Before Planck came along, the prevailing theory of atoms and atomic structure was that they were hard bits of matter that behaved predictably. And don't miss that we're talking about atoms, like the very building blocks of reality as we know it. According to the prevailing theory, reality is predictable and can be described predictably. But Planck discovered that atoms radiated heat not in constant flows, but in erratic packets called quanta. And you, like me, do not really need to understand exactly what that means. The thing you need to take away from that is that Planck's quantum mechanics showed that atoms behave irrationally, not along rigidly predetermined processes. In other words, the world at the atomic level was actually chaotic and unpredictable. And the point is, after Planck's work, the Newtonian universe was no longer able to adequately describe reality, and that was an unsettling thought. Okay, click here to keep reviewing for Unit 7 of AP European History. And if you're in the mood, click here to get my follow-along, fill-in-the-blank note guides for all my videos that will help you get an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May. And I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Heimler out.